The storm came down the mountains like a living thing. Wind roared across the Dakota plains, clawing at anything foolish enough to stand against it. Drifts rose and reshaped themselves in minutes, swallowing wagon tracks, fence posts, and sometimes entire wagons. Folks in town said this winter was the kind that tested a man's grit, the kind that made or broke homesteaders. Cal Brannigan knew that better than most. He rode hunched in the saddle, scarf pulled up to his eyes, hat dragged low. The snow slapped at him like hard little fists, but he pushed through, boots digging against the stirrups as he urged Scout, his old sorrel gelding, forward. He shouldn't have been out here. A father of two had no business braving a blizzard unless it was a matter of survival, his or someone else's. And tonight, it was someone else's. The message had come from a trapper who'd passed his cabin an hour before dusk. Saw a wagon stuck off the north ridge. Think someone's inside. Looked like a lady. A woman, stranded in this weather. Alone. Cal didn't think. He just went. By the time he reached the ridge, night had swallowed the plains. Darkness pressed close, broken only by streaks of white, where the wind dragged snow across the ground like tattered sheets. His lantern swung from his saddle horn, its flickering light barely cutting through the storm. He almost missed it. A bump of white nothing more sat against the rise of a drift. If he hadn't known to look, he'd have ridden past it. Then an edge caught the lantern light, the curved wooden rail of a wagon. Cal's gut clenched. "Hold, Scout," he murmured. The gelding snorted, reluctant, but stopped. Cal dismounted and slogged through waist-high snow. The cold bit straight through his coat, but he pushed on, digging gloved hands into the icy drift covering the wagon's side. Wood canvas, frozen leather straps. The thing was buried, deep-looked, like it had been stuck for hours. "Hello," he called, raising his voice over the wind. Anyone inside? Nothing but the scream of the storm. He dug harder, snow flying behind him in pale blue shadows. At last he cleared enough to reach the back flap. Frozen stiff, he forced it aside. A lantern flickered inside the cramped space. Blankets, a trunk, supplies, and a woman. She was curled on her side, arms wrapped around herself, lips blue-tinged, eyes barely open. Icicles clung to her bonnet strings. Her dress skirt was stiff with frost where it met her boots. For a moment, Cal forgot how to breathe. "Ma'am," he said, voice softening without him meaning it to. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered, focusing on him like it took work. You came." Her voice was no more than a whisper. "I did, and I'm gonna get you out of here." Tried. She shivered violently, tried to keep moving, but the mule spooked, broke free. Cal glanced around. The traces were snapped. The animal was long gone. "You're lucky that trapper spotted you." He removed his gloves and pressed 2 fingers to her cheek. "Ice or too cold. Can you walk?" She didn't answer. Her eyelids drifted closed again. "Right," he muttered. "We'll do it the hard way." He slid his arms beneath her, lifting her from the wagon. She was lighter than he expected, far too light, and limp. When the wind hit her full force, she gasped, a small, weak sound that cut straight into Cal's chest. He wrapped his coat around her, holding her tight against him. "Stay with me. We're not far." Scout stood steady as Cal mounted with her in his arms, the lantern swinging wildly now. The storm tried to pry her from him, but Cal braced his arms, sheltering her with his body. As they turned toward home, she murmured something into his coat. "What was that?" he asked, leaning down. "Please." Her voice trembled. Don't leave me here." Cal's jaw tightened. "Not a chance, ma'am." He rode into the storm as though he could stare it down. The Brannigan cabin sat against a small stand of pines, smoke smearing the sky from its chimney. It was warm, sturdy, and weathered like Cal himself. The light spilling from its windows was a soft golden glow in the darkness. Inside waited the reason he fought through storms at all. His children. Emily, aged 10, Finn, age 6. As Cal neared the porch, Emily burst through the door, wool shawl wrapped tight, light spilling around her. "You found Em?" she called. "Go back inside," Cal ordered gently. "Keep Finn by the fire." But Emily caught sight of the woman in his arms and gasped, hand flying to her mouth. "Oh heavens!" Inside, she ran. Cal carried the woman over the threshold, as Emily pushed furniture aside to clear space by the hearth. Finn sat cross-legged on the rug, clinging to his knitted blanket, eyes wide. "Is she dead?" he whispered. "No," Cal said firmly, "and she's not gonna be. Not tonight." He set the woman on the rug near the fire, propping her gently. Emily knelt beside her, untying the frozen bonnet strings with careful fingers. She's freezing. Pa, I know. Cal moved fast, fetching blankets, heating water, setting the kettle on the stove, stripping off his snow-wet coat. Emily helped without hesitation, her small hands steady. Finn fetched towels and the good quilt from their mother's old chest without being asked. The woman's eyelashes were rimed with frost, her skin without the bonnet. Her hair fell loose in auburn waves, tangled from wind and cold. "Ma'am," Cal said, rubbing warmth into her icy fingers. "Can you hear me?" She stirred faintly, breath shallow. "Emily," he said, "hand me that mug." He held the warm tin mug to the woman's lips. Steam drifted. She sipped weakly, then coughed. "Easy now," Cal murmured. Small sips. She obeyed, eyes flickering open for a moment. "You brought me here," she whispered. "Sure did. I'm Cal Brannigan. This here is Emily and Finn." Her gaze drifted to the children in a dazed kind of way. "Thank you," she breathed. Then she sagged against the pillows they'd stacked behind her. Over the next hour, color returned slowly to her cheeks. Her shivering eased. Emily kept tucking blankets around her, determined. Finn stayed close, watching with solemn fascination. Finally, as the wind howled outside and the cabin glowed with fire warmth, the woman's breathing steadied. She opened her eyes fully for the first time, and Cal realized they were the softest, clearest gray he'd ever seen. She looked around, confused but aware. "Where am I?" "The Brannigan cabin," Emily answered softly. Cal crouched beside her again. "You passed out in your wagon. If you'd been out there another hour, you wouldn't have made it." Her throat worked as she swallowed. I thought that might be the end of me. Not on my watch." She stared at him a moment, as if trying to place him in her memory. Then she whispered, "My name is Hazel Grant." Cal nodded. "Hazel, that's a fine name." Her lips trembled faintly. "Is my wagon still there?" "Yes, but it's half buried," he said. "I'll dig it out tomorrow once the storm passes." She closed her eyes in relief. "My things, everything I own is in it." Finn tilted his head. "Are you going somewhere, Miss Hazel?" Hazel looked at the little boy with a softness that surprised even her. "I'm headed west." "Or I was, for family?" Emily asked. Hazel's fingers tightened in the blanket. "No family, not anymore." Cal felt something stir in his chest. Recognition. Loss, new loss. Emily looked stricken. "You can stay here tonight. Pa won't let you go anywhere till the storm stops." Hazel gave a faint, grateful smile. "I don't think I could leave if I tried." "You won't," Cal said quietly. "You'll stay here till you're well enough to travel." Hazel nodded, exhaustion washing over her again. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Thank you for digging me out." Cal lifted the blanket higher across her shoulders. "You get some rest." Hazel drifted into a deep, much-needed sleep. Emily curled up beside her with a book. Finn lay on his stomach near the fire, drawing shapes in the rug fibers. Cal stood, rubbing a hand over his tired face. Storm raging outside, warmth and quiet inside. A stranger sleeping in front of his hearth. Yet something about her presence didn't feel strange at all. Emily looked up at him, brows lifted the way her mothers used to when she wanted the truth. "Pa, is she gonna be all right?" Cal looked at Hazel, this lost, frozen woman who'd nearly died in a snow-covered wagon, and felt something he hadn't in a long time. "Hope she will," he said softly. "She's safe now." He didn't know then, couldn't have known just how much her being here would change everything. How the storm hadn't brought danger, but the beginning of something their family had been missing more than they realized. Dawn came slow and sullen, dragging a gray light over the snow-wrapped plains. The storm had moved on, leaving the world buried in white silence. The pines behind the Brannigan cabin stood heavy and drooping, their branches sagging under the weight of the night's fury. Inside, warmth hummed through the log walls. The fire crackled steady, the stove whispered heat, and the smell of morning bacon filled the air. Cal stood at the window, steaming mug in hand, watching the quiet world outside. He hadn't slept much, kept waking in the night to check the fire, check the storm, and without meaning to check the woman asleep on the rug. Hazel Grant. She was alive, recovering, and more grateful than she knew. Behind him, she stirred. Cal turned as Hazel blinked her eyes open, confusion melting into recognition. The firelight painted her features softly, cheeks no longer blue, fingers no longer stiff, hair no longer frozen into brittle strands. Hazel pushed herself up slowly, clutching the quilt around her shoulders. "I must have slept half the day. It's barely morning, Cal said. You needed the rest. Her gaze drifted around the cabin wooden table, iron stove, shelves lined with jars, the children's boots by the door. It's a beautiful home, she said quietly. It's standing, warm, and doesn't leak too badly. That's enough for us. Hazel gave a tiny smile. More than enough. Emily appeared from the small bedroom, braiding her hair with practiced speed. Miss Hazel, you're awake. She hurried over and knelt beside her. How do you feel? Better than I expected, Hazel replied honestly, still a bit achy and embarrassed I caused such trouble. Cal waved that off. You didn't cause anything except a need for more firewood. And Pa always needs more firewood. Finn chimed in from behind Emily, yawning so wide his jaw cracked. Hazel smiled again. Truly grateful. Children, Cal said, set the table. Breakfast's ready. Emily and Finn scrambled to obey, squabbling lightly over who got the blue tin cup. Cal offered Hazel a hand. Can you stand? She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her fingers were small but strong. The moment she rose, her knees trembled. Cal steadied her with both hands. Hazel's breath caught, not from pain, not entirely, but from the sudden closeness. Sorry, she murmured. No need. You nearly froze Esselet last night. She let out a quiet, shaky laugh. It felt like it. He guided her to the chair closest to the fire. Emily placed a plate in front of her. Biscuits, eggs, crisp bacon. Hazel stared at the food like it was something sacred. You didn't have to cook extra for me, she said, guilt edging her tone. Emily shook her head vehemently. Course we did. Pa says a person saves someone. They're obliged to feed em. Cal snorted. I said no such thing. But you would have if you'd thought of it. Hazel's laugh came softer this time, warmer. She picked up her fork, took a bite of the eggs, then stopped mid-chew as tears filled her eyes. Emily panicked. Are they bad? I told Finn he put too much pepper. No, Hazel whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. They're perfect, digest. It's been a while since I've had a warm meal. Cal's chest tightened. Not pity, something deeper. Something like recognition, and an ache he hadn't let himself feel in years. Emily reached across the table and wrapped her little hand around Hazel's. You can stay till you're strong, Emily said. We want you to. Emily, Cal said gently. That's not our call. Hazel began to protest, but Emily's eyes, so earnest, so full of wanting, made her fall silent. Cal set his mug down. Hazel, you're welcome to rest here until you can travel safely. After that, we'll get your wagon dug out and send you on your way. Hazel nodded, hiding a flicker of something Cal couldn't read. Fear, sadness, loneliness. He didn't ask, didn't pry, not his place, but it lingered with him through the meal. Later that morning, Cal bundled himself up and headed out to dig out Hazel's wagon. Emily protested, begging to help, but Cal insisted she stay with Hazel. Finn wanted to go too, but the snow still came up past his waist. He whistled for Scout and set off across the freshly buried plains. Hazel watched him from the window, quilt wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't say anything out loud, but Emily saw the wistful look in her eyes. You really scared us, Emily said, handing Hazel a steaming cup of tea. Pa barely slept. He kept checking to make sure you were breathing. Hazel nearly dropped the cup. He did. Emily nodded. Pa's like that. He cares even when he pretends he don't. Hazel's throat tightened again. She sipped the tea slowly. You all have been so kind, Hazel murmured. Kinder than anyone has been to me in a long time. Emily set her hands on her hips. Why were you out there alone, Miss Hazel? Ain't right for a lady to be traveling the plains without someone. Hazel stared into the fire. I didn't have a choice. Emily's eyes softened. Did someone hurt you? Hazel hesitated, dicey memories flickering across her face like shadows. I just needed to leave, Hazel said. Needed to start new somewhere the past can't follow. Emily nodded in solemn understanding that sounded far too grown for her 10 years. Pa says new starts are hard, but sometimes they're all a person's got. Hazel smiled sadly. Your father seems very wise. Emily shrugged. He pretends he ain't, but he is. Hazel didn't doubt it. The sun crept higher through the washed-out sky as Cal reached the wagon. It was buried so deep it looked like part of the land itself. He set to work with his shovel, the rhythmic thud of metal against frozen snow echoing across the plains. He worked for hours, not because he had to, though he did, but because something twisted in him when he pictured Hazel alone in here, freezing slowly as night fell. When he finally cracked the wagon free, he climbed inside to assess the damage. blankets, a trunk full of modest clothes, a Bible worn soft at the edges, a sewing kit, canned peaches, a small wooden box locked tight. He didn't pry, but he did notice something else, a bundle of letters tied with frayed ribbon, stuffed into the corner beneath the trunk, at least a dozen envelopes, all addressed to Hazel Grant, none opened. Cal frowned. Why carry letters from someone she refused to read? He backed out of the wagon, questions flickering like unsettled embers, but he shook them off. Hazel's troubles weren't his. He harnessed Scout to drag the wagon free and brought it back toward the cabin as the sun slid westward. Hazel was sitting up when he returned, cheeks warmer, eyes brighter. "You got it out," she said breathlessly as Cal pulled the wagon near the barn. "Took a bit of work," he replied, unhooking Scout. "Wheels ain't damaged." "That's lucky." "Lucky," Hazel echoed, though her expression twisted into unease. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to stay. Cal could see both truths on her face, as plain as the snow outside. Emily, oblivious to the tension, clapped her hands. Pa's the strongest man in the Dakota Territory. He could dig out the whole mountain if he wanted. Cal snorted. "I can barely dig out my own barn." Hazel smiled at that, a soft, grateful curve of her lips. That made something flutter low in Cal's chest. He wasn't sure he liked it, or maybe he liked it too much. That night, Hazel insisted she sleep in the small bedroom Emily usually used, but Emily refused, dragging blankets into Finn's room instead. "You need the bed," Emily declared. "You're the one who nearly froze." Hazel couldn't argue. Cal kept to his own room, but he paused at Hazel's doorway before bedding down. "You sure you're warm enough?" he asked. Hazel nodded. "Warmer than I've been in weeks." She watched him for a moment, taking in the way he leaned in the doorway, hat in his hand, hair tousled from the wind. His eyes were steady, concerned but careful, like he didn't want to cross a line. "I've taken enough of your family's kindness," Hazel said softly. "When the weather clears, I'll be on my way." Cal nodded once. "If that's what you want." Hazel opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her hands. I don't know what I want," she admitted. Cal exhaled through his nose. "That's all right. You don't need to know tonight." She looked up at him, startled by his gentleness. "Rest. Hazel will figure the rest in the morning." Cal stepped away. Hazel lay awake long after he left, listening to the distant sound of him stoking the fire, the creak of floorboards under his boots, the muffled laughter of Emily and Finn. A warm home, a steady father, a family that felt whole, something she'd never had, something she didn't deserve to want, yet she wanted it all the same, and she feared the morning more than she feared the storm, because when morning came, she'd have to decide whether to leave the safest place she'd known in years. Morning broke soft and gold across the Dakota plains. The sun warmed the frost-glazed windows of the Brannigan cabin, casting long beams across the wooden floorboards. Birds began to chatter in the pines behind the house, their song weaving through the lingering hush left by last night's snowfall. Inside, Hazel sat at the edge of the bed, lacing her boots slowly. Truth was, her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something far more unsettling. She was leaving today, or she thought she should, or she feared she shouldn't. The wagon sat behind the barn, dug out and ready. The storm had passed. The roads, if they could be called such, were clearer. She had no excuse to stay, except that she wanted to, and that was the one thing she could not bring herself to say aloud. In the kitchen, Cal moved quietly, frying bacon and stirring biscuits in the skillet, while Emily set the table and Finn chased after a runaway wooden horse across the floor. It was the kind of ordinary chaos Hazel had never known, warm, busy, alive. When she stepped into the room, all three looked up. Emily beamed. "Miss Hazel, you slept late. You must be feeling lots better." "I am," Hazel said, trying to smile even though her chest felt heavy. "More than I deserve." Cal's gaze flicked to her, steady, warm, and knowing in a way that made her heart give a painful squeeze. "You hungry?" he asked, starving. Hazel sat down as Cal placed a plate in front of her. As she took the first bite, the flavor washed over her like comfort itself, simple, hearty food made by a hand that cared. Emily leaned her elbows on the table. "Pa said he'll check your wagon again this morning. Make sure everything's tied down." Hazel's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Cal paused at the stove. Sensing the shift in her, Hazel set the fork down, her voice soft. "I appreciate that." Finn, oblivious to the tension, looked up brightly. "Are you going today?" Hazel swallowed hard. I believe I should. Emily's smile faltered. Finn frowned. Cal turned from the stove, drying his hands on a towel, and walked to the table. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat, elbows on his knees, posture calm but eyes sharp. Hazel, he said gently, if you're leaving, I want it to be because you're ready, not because you feel pushed out. She stared into her plate, blinking too quickly. I don't want to overstay. You haven't. I've already taken too much. You saved my boy from freezing fingers last night when he fell asleep near the door, Cal said, voice low. So I'd say we're square. Hazel let out a surprised laugh, but it broke halfway through and turned into a sob she quickly swallowed. Emily scooted closer, wrapping her small arms around Hazel's shoulders. We'll miss you. Finn nodded solemnly. Lots. Hazel hugged them both, wiping at her eyes. You children have been nothing but sweet. I won't forget your kindness. You don't have to go yet, Emily whispered against her sleeve. You really don't. Cal watched silently, quiet, patient, waiting. He wasn't a man to push, but he didn't look like a man eager to see her go. Either. When Hazel finally pulled away from the children, she stood abruptly. I'd like to check my wagon, she said, voice too formal. Cal nodded once. I'll go with you. Hazel hesitated. I think I should look alone. Cal's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. All right, he gestured toward the door. Holler if you need anything. Hazel nodded and stepped outside, pulling her shawl tight. The cold nipped her cheeks, but the day was bright, wind light, sky clear. It would be a safe day to travel. Her heart didn't seem to care. Behind the barn, the wagon stood exactly as Cal had placed it, straight, steady, wheels freed and oiled. Hazel opened the flap and climbed inside. The familiar smell greeted her. Cedar from the trunk, old parchment from the letters, faint lavender from the sachets tucked between her clothes. Home, if she had one. She sat heavily on the trunk, fingers brushing the tied bundle of letters. Her chest tightened. She still hadn't opened any of them. She hadn't in years. They were from him, the man she'd once thought would marry her, the man who'd left her behind when a better life came calling. She'd kept the letters at first to burn them when she was brave enough. Then she kept them because they reminded her not to trust hope again. She lifted the bundle now, staring at the faded ink. A shadow fell across the wagon. Cal stood outside, hat in his hands, voice low. You said you wanted to look alone. Figured I should still check on you. Hazel looked down, throat tight. You shouldn't have wasted your morning on this. It ain't wasted if it's for someone who needs help. Hazel set the letters aside quickly, almost ashamed he'd seen them. I don't need help. Not anymore. Cal didn't step in, didn't crowd her. Then why do you look like leaving's tearing you in two? Hazel's breath caught. She stared at her hands. Because you've all been kinder to me than anyone has in years, and that scares you. Yes, she whispered. Cal nodded slowly. Hazel, you don't have to tell me what drove you out here, but you should know one thing. She lifted her eyes. You're not a burden. Not to me, not to my kids, not to this home. Her lip trembled. You say that now. I say it because it's true. Hazel wiped at her cheeks, frustrated by the tears. Cal, she said softly, if I stay, I won't want to leave, and I'm not sure your family needs someone like me weaving into it. Cal stepped closer. My children haven't laughed like they did last night in months. Hazel's breath hitched, and I haven't. He paused, swallowing hard. I haven't felt anything but emptiness in a long time. Not until you walked through that door. Hazel stared at him, stunned. I'm not asking you to stay forever, Cal said. I'm just saying, you don't have to leave today. Hazel looked at the letters again, then at the children running outside, throwing snowballs in the yard, and finally, at Cal, sincere, offering nothing but truth. Slowly, she untied the ribbon around the letters. They spilled across her lap, unopened. One by one, she fed them into a small tin basin kept beside her trunk. The paper curled and blackened as she lit a match to them, until all that remained was ash. Cal watched silently, respect in his expression. When the last letter crumbled to soot, Hazel looked up. I'd like to stay, she whispered, voice unsteady but sure. If you truly mean the offer. Cal let out a slow, relieved breath. I mean it. Hazel stepped down from the wagon. Cal extended his hand, not demanding, not insisting, just offering. Hazel placed her hand in his. It fit perfectly. When they walked back to the cabin, Emily saw them first. She burst from the doorway, snow in her hair, eyes glowing. Miss Hazel, Did you decide? Are you leaving? Hazel reached her, kneeling to be eye level. No, she said softly. Not today. Not anytime soon, if your father's still willing to have me. Emily threw her arms around Hazel's neck. Finn cheered so loud a flock of birds scattered from the pines. Cal stood on the porch, watching the scene unfold with a softness Hazel hadn't seen in him before. Softness that told her she'd made the right choice. Inside the cabin, Hazel felt warmth rush over her in a way no fire could give. She wasn't just staying out of exhaustion or fear. She was staying because something with this family felt like it had been waiting for her all along. And as Cal brushed past her to stoke the fire, their hands brushed, just a light touch, but enough to send her heart racing. Hazel realized something with startling clarity. She hadn't just been dug out of the snow. She'd been found, and for the first time in years, she wanted to be. That night, as the fire glowed low and Emily and Finn slept warm beneath their quilts, Hazel stood by the window. The stars glittered above the plains like frost scattered across black velvet. Cal stepped beside her quietly. "You're sure you're staying?" he murmured. Hazel nodded. "I am." Cal's jaw softened. Good. Hazel looked up at him. "What now?" "Well," Cal said, taking her hand gently, "now we take it one day at a time, and maybe see where this road goes." Hazel's breath caught. "Cal Brannigan, is that your way of asking me to stay in your life?" He smiled, a slow, rare, warm thing that made her insides flutter. "It's my way of telling you," he said, "that you already are." Hazel leaned her head on his shoulder, and in the quiet warmth of the cabin, with the storm long behind them and a new road ahead, she finally felt what she'd been chasing all along. A place to belong, a family that wanted her, a home.